Good morning. My name is Shira May Moore, and I will be presenting my project Sexuality in Other Cultures with a focus on the Philippines. So, the Philippines is located in southeastern Asia. It's an archipelago situated between the Philippine Sea and South China. During the 16th century, it was colonized by Spain. In 1898, after the Spanish American War, it was ceded to the United States, and in 1935, it became a self governing commonwealth. Sexuality is an important concept that varies across cultures and ethnic backgrounds. According to the World Health Organization, sexuality encompasses important concepts and aspects, including one's thoughts, feelings, beliefs, behaviors, roles, and relationships. Also, according to WHO, sexuality may also be influenced by the biopsychosocial, economic, cultural, religious factors. Culture can impact sexuality, and we'll learn a little bit more about that later in this presentation. According to Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, culture may be understood as a collection of beliefs, customs, values, communication, ways of thinking, customs, and behaving that's specific to a group. Um, so we're going to learn a little bit more about these aspects that are connected with Filipino sexuality, and these include premarital sex, marriage and family, and sexual double standards. In the Asian culture, traditionally, there holds conservative attitudes and beliefs, but as Western culture started to reach out to more countries, more and more countries, I would say there are similarities of sexuality concepts and perspectives that occur between the Philippines and the US. It's common for individuals to experience premarital sex, whether it's in the United States or in the Philippines. In 1982, the Demographic Research and Development Foundation and the University of the Philippines Population Institute began the Young Adult Fertility and Sexuality Study. The YAFS studies consisted of a series of cross sectional surveys on Filipino youth between the ages of 15 to 24 years old. And these studies mainly focus on sexuality and reproductive health concerns among the Filipino youth. The purpose of conducting these studies was to basically develop a greater understanding of sexuality among the Filipino youth and work towards supporting their health and wellness. So, while conducting these studies, the researchers actually learned a lot more about the Filipino youth regarding various aspects, including demographics, sexuality, STI history, education attainment, and others. As of 2010, the Philippine census reported over 18 million individuals between the ages of 15 to 24 years old. And this basically comprises 19.6% of the Filipino population. According to the DRDF and UPPI, early sexual initiation also begins, it can begin before age 18. The YAFS findings actually show that Filipino youth began premarital sex before age 18. And as you can see here in figure 1, it depicts basically that the premarital sex that Filipino youth engaged in increased from 13% in 1984 to 23% in 2013. Comparatively, male Filipino youth reported lower median age at sexual initiation of 17.8 years, while the female Filipino youth reported a median age of 18.2 years. And figure 1 also depicts these trends as male Filipino youth are more likely to engage in early sexual initiation before age 18 compared with the female Filipino youth. According to the DRDF and the UPPI, premarital sex refers to sexual activity prior to having a formal marriage or cohabiting with a partner. For example, the YFS findings revealed an increasing trend of premarital sex among Filipino youth. The prevalence of premarital sex among all Filipino youth dramatically increased from 17.8% in 1994 to 32.2% in 2013. And this can actually be depicted in figure 2 here to the right. Again, there appears to be differences between the prevalence of premarital sex among male and female Filipino youth. So here, male Filipino youth experienced a smaller increase of 9.7% in premarital sex from 1994 to 2013, as opposed to the female Filipino youth who experienced a greater increase of about 18.5% from that same time period. However, figure 2 also depicts clearly that there's a higher prevalence of male Filipino youth engaging in premarital sex than the female Filipino youth. According to the DRDF and the UPPI, teenage childbearing for females refers to the proportion of females between the ages of 15 to 19 years old who begun childbearing, which means at that time of the survey of the YFS studies, the women were pregnant or had already given birth. During the past 10 years of the YFS studies, the proportion of teenage childbearing has increased substantially, doubling from 6.3% in 2002 to 13.6% in 2013. Figure 3 here to the right depicts this proportion of teenage childbearing in 2013, which consisted of 11% of female Filipino women who were already mothers and 2.6% who were pregnant with their first child. According to the DRDF and the UPPI, teenage childbearing also refers to the proportion of males aged 15 to 19 years old who reportedly got someone else pregnant. However, this measure may be prone to bias as males may not always know whether or not they'd father their child. The YAFS findings also show that 2.4% of males between the ages of 15 to 19 years old have gotten someone else pregnant. Filipino youth also reported experiences of reproductive health issues while engaging in premarital sex. Some of these symptoms might include genital warts, itching of the genital areas, abnormal genital discharge, and painful urination, blood in the urinate. According to figure 4 here to the right, symptoms seem to be experienced at the same rate for both males and females, similar except for the painful urination. It looks like females experience more of that symptom compared with the men. The YAFS 4 survey reports other sexual behaviors that Filipino youth engage in, and these actually include casual sex, commercial sex, regular non-romantic sexual relationships, and extramarital sex. With the understanding of the other sexual behaviors that Filipino youth engage in, it's important to understand that the engaging in these behaviors can increase risk of unplanned pregnancy or STI. Ever married Filipino youth here in this study refers to those who have married at least once. So those ever married Filipino youth who have engaged in various types of sexual activity are actually prevalent here in the Philippines. And for example, here on figure 5 to the right, it shows the percentage of those who have engaged in at least one type of or multiple types of sexual activity. So for example, 10.1% of ever married Filipino youth who engage in extramarital sex are males, compared to the 0.6% of females. And also, for example, 9.4% of ever married Filipino youth who engage in regular non-romantic sex are males, compared to the 0.7% of females. Furthermore, another example, 18% of Filipino youth who engage in casual sex reported using a condom during their last casual sex experience. So, as you can see here, figure 5, there's comparing both the male and female engagement of these other sexual behaviors, and it's clear to see that males actually experience higher rates of engagement of these behaviors. And just another reminder that engaging in these other sexual activities and not practicing safe sex can increase the risk of obtaining an unplanned pregnancy or contracting an STI. Now that we're getting into the United States, it's important to learn more about the cultural differences of premarital sex. So here, teen pregnancies declined over time in the U.S. According to the CDC, by 2017, 194,000 babies were born to women between the ages of 15 to 19 years old, which actually conveys a decrease of 7% of teenage birth rates since 2016. Also, according to the CDC, low socioeconomic conditions may impact high teen birth rates. This includes low education and income. As young couples choose to engage in premarital or non-marital sex, they may also choose to enter premarital or non-marital cohabitation. Premarital cohabitation was introduced in the 1970s and was not accepted well in society then as it is today. It's become very common for couples to cohabit and engage in premarital sex to learn more about their partners prior to officially tying the knot. If that's what they choose to do, and what their plan is in terms of cohabitation. We actually have several researchers, including Rosenfeld and Roessler. They conducted a study to explore the short-term and long-term effects of premarital cohabitation for marital stability. So, just looking back on the study from Rosenfeld and Roessler, their findings show that premarital cohabitation does not significantly impact the risk of divorce in the early stages of marriage, not in the way it does in the later stages of marriage. This can actually be clearly depicted here in figure 6, which shows that the increased risk of separation for married couples during the early stages of marriage when they did not cohabit prior to marriage compared to those who did cohabit prior to marriage. So here in the red line, it shows those marriages in which the woman cohabited with the husband, one before marriage. And then the blue line shows the ones who did not cohabit with the husband, one before marriage. And so it looks like the breakup rates are a lot different compared between these two groups. So comparatively, married couples who did cohabit were more likely to reach their peak of divorce between 2 to 5 years of marriage. And like I said, this can actually be depicted here in figure 6. According to Rosenfeld and Roessler, non-marital sex and non-marital cohabitation is referred to engaging in sex and or living with other partners. And here from the study, non-marital cohabitation was a significant predictor of divorce than premarital cohabitation with their future marriage partner. Figure 7 here shows that the divorce rate of married couples whose wife engaged in non-marital cohabitation was significantly higher than the divorce rate for those who engage in premarital cohabitation. So there's a difference between non-marital and premarital cohabitation. Non-marital is more, like I said previously, when they're just engaging in sex, living with other partners. Premarital cohabitations, basically, they're living together, not married yet, but their goal is to marry with their future marriage partner. And based on this information as a whole, it is clear that premarital sex and cohabitation does have an impact on marriage and family. The concepts of marriage and family appear to have their own uniqueness compared to the United States. The Philippine Statistics Authority reports statistical data on marriages in the Philippines. In the 2019 release of statistical data, PSA reports that marriages can occur among Filipino individuals as early as 15 to 19 years old. And this can be conveyed in Figure 8, showing the number of marriages in the Philippines by occurrence of each month from 2017 and 2018. As you can see, there are a bunch of variations here that are depicted in Figure 8. Let's see. PSA also reports that the average age of women who got married in 2018 was 27 years old, and the average age of men who got married during the same year is 29 years old. During the first 3 series of the YAFS surveys, researchers found that the marital status among Filipino youth has changed substantially. In 2002, we can see how cohabiting relationships increased from 5.9% to 13.8% in 2013. Also, the YAFS findings show that 61% of the Filipino youth who were married during 2013 were reportedly in a cohabiting relationship or live-in arrangement prior to becoming formally married. Interestingly, there's also a difference in the type of marriage that the Filipino youth experience. For example, about 3 in every 5 marriages that were experience a religious ceremony to formalize their marital union, whereas 1 in every 3 marriages experience a civil marriage ceremony. 14% of those marriages, not of these marriages, but of the entire population who did marry in 2013 had eloped. So in Figure 9 here, it shows that 38.2% of the total number of marriages were arranged through civil ceremonies. 36.6% were solemnized in the Roman Catholic Church. And so it is also important to understand, due to the Spanish colonization, Roman Catholicism continued to dominate in Filipino aspects, including societal values and laws. So here we can see, apart from civil ceremony, Roman Catholic Church marriages were still pretty high in this during this time. Researchers Gibson and Hicks conducted a study in 2017 that explored the connections between sex and marriage among young Filipino women. The purpose of conducting this study was to examine the sexual and reproductive behaviors of Filipino youth and de-link the connection between sex and marriage within the Filipino youth. As part of their previous research, they explained that participants in a previous 2009 survey were aged between 25 and 26 years old. And among those who did have engaged in sex by 2009, the average age of early sexual initiation was 19.7 years old. Also, the number and duration of marriages or cohabitations varied among these participants in this past 2009 survey. So, based on their study, Gibson and Hicks found that women reportedly experienced between 0 to 4 marriages or cohabitations, with most women reportedly experiencing only 1 union. Women also reported that the length of marriage and or cohabitation spanned between 0 to 11 years old, and it basically averaged 3.46 years. So Gibson and Hicks also found that the sample of young Filipino women with early sexual initiation, length of partnership, and frequency had shown strong independent influences on their fertility. So the findings depicted in the change in sexual behavior between younger generations and previous generations show that the sexual behavior was mainly connected with marriage, changing over time due to that increasing gap between early sexual initiation and marriage. So, and cohabitation also increased during this time, which delayed marriage and also increases engagement in premarital sex. So, based on this information, we can see that over time, there's been changes from the between the previous generations and the younger generations. Sexual behavior has changed, attitudes and thoughts and feelings have changed as well. I mean, previously, as we stated, cohabitation was more likely to be less likely to be accepted. Excuse me. Now cohabitation has been increasing, which is probably why in the Filipino culture, more and more younger individuals are waiting to get married and are also engaging in premarital sex. It's important to note various illegal sexual activities in the Philippines, and this actually includes sex work, abortion, pornography, same-sex marriage, and divorce. And I know it's pretty interesting to know that Philippines is only one of two who has not legalized divorce at this time. But however, recently a bill was approved on February 20th of this year by the Committee on Population and Family Relations of the Philippine House of Representatives, and that's regarding the legalization of divorce. So at that time, Representative Edsel Lagman wrote the bill and arguing that divorce law should be proposed and that it cannot, understanding that it won't undo the years of Filipino customs and traditions that celebrate marriage and family, but it can also allow spouses that possibility of divorce when they do not have a functioning marriage. Part of this issue was that, many women, meaning married women, were experiencing abuse, perhaps, with their spouse. And so because of the inability to actually divorce their spouse, it was creating a lot of stigmatization and gender inequality. And so this proposed bill was proposed to hopefully eliminate that gender inequality. And also part of this bill introduces a 6-month cooling off period for both parties, and also provides the court the time to work towards reuniting and supporting that family, especially because it reflects that the Filipino culture still wants to keep the family together. So despite that, this proposed bill is trying to legalize divorce, which is absolutely, it goes against the Filipino culture as for many, many years now. It still provides that aspect of, wanting the court to still work towards reuniting and supporting the family however much they can. So now we're going to go back into understanding the marriage and family concepts in the United States. As you can see, it has changed drastically over time. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the average age at first marriage has increased significantly, and this can clearly be depicted here in Figure 10. For example, in 1960, the average age at first marriage was about age 20 for women and age 23 for men. And as you can see, it starts to increase, gets closer towards the most current and recent years of 2019. We can see for men, average age of first marriage was about the early 30s, as well as the late 20s for women. So researchers Doherty and Gopin of the Division of Vital Statistics conducted a 2016 report for the National Health Statistics Report, which discusses the trends and attitudes in the U.S. regarding various concepts, including marriage, childbearing, and sexual behavior. So according to the surveys that were taken between 2011 to 2013, we learned that 74.4% of women and 75.9% of men during this time period reported that having and raising children and cohabiting relationships is acceptable. So knowing this information, going back on what we've previously talked about cohabitation, was that in the past, cohabitation was not as easily accepted as it is now. So we can clearly see in this study how true that information is. So Wagner is another researcher who conducted a study to explore marriage in the United States with the purpose of understanding how marriage can change behavior, including sexual concurrency. Here, sexual concurrency is the understanding of having temporarily overlapping sexual partners. So just having multiple ones at the same time, especially understanding that engaging in those concurrent sexual relationships can actually lead to the risk of increased risk of contracting STIs, spreading of sexual infections to the general population, as well as increased risk of having marital distress. Findings show from the study that cohabitation increases the probability of sexual concurrency by 57% comparative to those who just married their partners. More so, cohabiting individuals are more likely to engage in sexual concurrency than married individuals. So this finding shows the risk of stability within cohabiting relationships within the United States. It's also important to discuss the various gender roles and sexual double standards that individuals still often experience to this day. Gender equality continues to be a profound, controversial topic in today's society. Several areas where men and women face gender inequalities include the educational system, career development, financial gain, and sexual double standards. Sexual double standards may vary across cultures, and there actually seems to be noticeable difference in these standards within the Filipino culture. Researchers Manalastas and David conducted a study in 2018 to examine the concept of women's virginity in the Philippines while also exploring the sexual double standards that are prevalent among Filipino men and women. Here, virginity just basically means individuals who have not engaged in sex, and there actually are a variety of social constructs that are related to virginity. So these social constructs are depicted in figure 11 here to our right. For example, virginity is perceived as a unique one-time gift from oneself to their first sexual partner. People may perceive themselves as being embarrassed or ashamed because they haven't lost their own virginity yet. Perhaps they may perceive virginity as a sacred and spiritual significance. And they may also perceive it as a developmental process of adulthood, something that you just kind of go through to become an adult. So apart from the social meanings of virginity, there are gender differences as well. Male and female sexuality are perceived and valued differently across cultures. According to research by Manalastas and David, sexual double standards refer to the application of different standards for sexual restrictiveness and permissiveness for men and women, and these may differ between various cultures and ethnicities. Several of these sexual double standards include labeling girls in a negative way when they express interest in sexuality, but encouraging boys to behave in that way. Another example is punishing or shaming married women who engage in extramarital sex, but permitting men to behave in that way. In the Filipino culture, sexuality is also connected to the deep roots of Roman Catholicism, as stated previously. So it's also collectively important to understand that social norms are of greater value than individual goals in the Filipino culture, and it's of greater importance to consider what issues or behavior can cause disgrace to one's family. Filipino women may be labeled as a bad woman and may receive shame if they were to engage in premarital sex, and they may also be perceived as having lost their honor or value if they lost their virginity prior to marriage. So here, based on this information, it is clear that virginity is highly valued in the Filipino culture. So among the Filipino, another issue that's going to be discussed here in this slide is the gender inequality that is experienced between women and men in the workforce. Filipino women are generally perceived as loving, caring, and nurturing. According to Alapio, another researcher, they reported that Filipino women who migrate outside the Philippines for work are largely employed as caregivers, nurses, and domestic helpers. And this is where they're taking care of other families and children for work, in addition to their own families that are already in the Philippines. So, despite physically being able to travel out of their country for employment, Filipino women are still facing these gender roles that are ascribed to them based on these societal expectations. So, furthermore, they're also forced to postpone marriage, childbearing, and parenthood, as well as leaving their own children with caregivers, experiencing the stigma and guilt from disconnecting their household, and also weakening connections that with other family members. So it's clear here that Filipino women experience a variety of hardships within their own roles based on societal expectations. Now, in contrast, Filipino men are largely perceived as being providers in the family, energetic sex partners, and strong father figures. According to LPO, Filipino men who migrated outside of the Philippines for employment were most likely to be perceived as being able to obtain respect through their ability to be independent, physically dominant, self-disciplined, and able to refrain from sex. Filipino men are also able to provide more money to their families through these societal expectations. And we also need to consider those differences in wages between genders. So it's clear here that Filipino men are also perceived as the masculine breadwinners within the family. Now we're going to go back into the United States, discussing sexual double standards, which are actually apparent in the U.S. Thompson and other researchers conducted a study to explore the attitudes of heterosexual U.S. adults about the initiation of consensual, non-monogamous relationship behaviors. So consensual non-monogamy here refers to romantic relationships that are not exclusive sexually and or emotionally. So what they found in the study are that gender differences are prevalent in sexual attitudes. For example, sexual scripts are normally used in U.S. culture to respond to sexual experiences with guidance on how to feel, think, and behave in different sexual experiences. The sexual script theory conveys that the idea that men and women have different expectations while adopting different scripts that results in different roles in sexuality. So generally, these findings show that men are more likely to value short-term relationships and seek pleasure in relationships, whereas women are more likely to value long-term relationships and seek passion. However, the findings reveal that there is a reverse sexual double standard in which male initiators of CNM are more likely judged for their behavior than their female initiators. This shows, female participants of the study are more accepting of CNM than men, which isn't entirely surprising due to recent research, which conveys that women report more accepting attitudes of non-traditional behaviors than do men, such as same-sex relationships. Gender roles and sexual double standards are also prevalent within the workplace. Rice and Barth are another couple researchers who conducted a study that examines traditional gender role and stereotyping that impact the hiring process. Rice and Barth discuss the traditional gender roles and expectations of career attainment for both men and women. For example, men are predominantly hired for positions in the STEM field than women, and these gender role stereotypes negatively impact the hiring process for women to pursue a career in these fields. Previous research has found that men and women are more likely to enter career fields that are closely aligned to their gender-specific stereotype. For example, women are more likely to enter occupations related to life goal priorities that support their family values. In comparison, men are more likely to enter occupations related to financial and individualistic goals. So also, the findings from the study do support the concept that individuals are most likely hired in occupations closely aligned to their gender-specific stereotype. Furthermore, employers who hold less traditional gender role beliefs were less likely to be gender biased during the hiring process. And also, those who held more traditional gender role beliefs were more likely to favor men. So, it's hopeful that more individuals can develop a greater understanding of these sexual double standards, so that it can allow for greater understanding of other cultures and ethnicities. So, after comparing sexuality in the Philippines and the US, it's clear that there are similarities between both cultures. When discussing premarital sex, for example, it's understood that early sexual initiation occurred before age 18. There's been an increased trend of premarital sex and teen childbearing in the Philippines, as well as the engagement of other sexual activities. In comparison, we have American culture here. Although teenage childbearing did decline over time, there also were engagement of other forms of sex, including premarital sex, non-marital sex, and other cohabitation as well, increased in trends of cohabitation. And then both, of course, the engagement of other types of sex, not casual sex, non-marital, so on and so forth. They can also lead to unplanned pregnancies and possibly STIs. Now, when talking about marriage and family, in the Philippines, marriages can occur as early as age 15 to 19, increasing trends of later delayed marriages around late 20s and early 30s. Also, divorce is illegal in this country. Comparably with American culture, the engagement of non-marital or premarital cohabitation also increased, which does impact divorce later on in marriage. So here in American culture, divorce is legal. Of course, you do have to file paperwork, so on and so forth. So it is interesting that in the Philippines, divorce is illegal. And also, when discussing gender roles and stereotypes, sexual double standards, we found that Filipino men and women perceive importance for women maintaining their virginity status prior to marriage. Also, Filipino men and women pursue careers closely aligned with their gender roles and stereotypes. So, for example, of course, men taking on roles that, because of their masculinity, they're the breadwinners. And then we have the women who are more likely to be working in jobs like caregiving and nursing, stuff like that. And then in the American culture, sex scripts are used to allow individuals to think, feel, and behave according to their differing sexual roles. But also, same as in the Philippines, American men and women also pursue careers closely aligned within their gender roles and stereotypes. So, as we can see here, just based on all of this information compacted together, we can see that despite that they are different cultures, different ethnic backgrounds, it's important to note that there are similarities as well as differences that each encompass concept of sexuality. So it's important that understanding how sexuality in both cultures have changed over time, and how others can learn these differences, these similarities, so that they can learn how to adapt and respect both cultures. Over time, though, it is likely that sexuality will continue to evolve as well. So I just wanted to say mahalo for your time. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to present my project to you and also sharing a piece of my culture. I did learn a lot, and it's very surprising to learn some of this information. But yeah, I just wanted to also take this time to say stay safe and take care. All right, good luck.